Hello there. Today we're doing a deep dive into this book, Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. This is the book that has been recommended to me the most times by far and the most emphatically by far, which is fascinating because this is science fiction, like straight science fiction, a genre I don't frequently read or talk about here. So it has to be good, right? Like for people to be begging me to read this to the degree that they are, I'm gonna like it. They're promising me I'll like it. Today we're finding out. I want to start off by saying that I know a little bit about this book. I know that there's a reveal, not necessarily a plot twist, but I think that you're kind of in the dark with the narrator the whole time, and then it reveals to you what's going on. I'm also pretty certain that I've seen the movie, but I refuse to look it up because I'm deathly afraid of being spoiled somehow. When I was in high school, we were watching Dead Poet Society. If you don't want spoilers for that movie, skip this. I'm looking up, what's this little tune that Robin Williams is whistling all the time in Dead Poet Society? Why does it say people also ask, how did the kid kill himself? We were watching it in English class in 15-minute increments. I was like 30 minutes into the fucking movie, and oh my god. The worst experience of my life. So I refuse to look up any movie information about this book. I am pretty sure I've seen it. It has Natalie Portman in it, right? So I keep expecting the story to come back to me as I'm reading, and so far, 3 chapters, which is almost halfway through, it hasn't. This begins with a group of women on an expedition to Area X, a no longer inhabited area blocked off with some sort of mysterious and distressing border where the ecosystems are more varied, more hostile, and slightly unexpected. They're in the first exposition into Area X in 2 years and the 12th overall. The previous expositions have not gone very well, with many deaths and significant impacts on the mental well-being of the people sent in. The last exposition before this one, everyone disappeared, and then they ended up at different points back home, having crossed that mysterious border on their own with no information on how. Just that they had the overwhelming sense that they needed to go back home, and their next memory is being back home. So they have to keep a close eye on the other people in the expedition's mental state. There's this idea that it's almost inevitable for some of them or all of them to lose their grip on reality. There's also some weird rules, like they're not allowed to attempt contact with the outside to avoid some irrevocable contamination. They have no compasses or watches. They don't have almost any of the technology that they're accustomed to having, not even to record data, which is what they've been sent to do. They record data exclusively in their journals, which they're not allowed to show each other to reduce bias. And that's what we're reading, the Journal of the Biologist. Aside from her, there's a psychologist, a surveyor, and an anthropologist. Like how they aren't allowed to share their journal entries, they're also encouraged to refer to each other by their position to keep each other at arm's length and prioritize the expedition over the personal. We never learn any of their names, at least not up until the point I'm at. And anyway, it doesn't even matter because the narrator tells us right from the beginning that only the surveyor would last the next day or two, which is a huge shock, of course, especially because the psychologist is the leader of the group and they all defer to her. And it's weird to think of what the change in dynamic is going to be like when you've only just been introduced to this dynamic. To get into Area X, they had to cross this border, and the psychologist put them all under hypnosis to reduce their distress. They were told unequivocally, do not look back at the border once you're out of the hypnosis. But the biologist snuck a peek, and she saw something that was like kind of indistinct and fuzzy, some sort of impression of a gate way in the distance. This is an image I have in my head of the movie. I can think of it so clear. I can think of Natalie Portman's worried-looking face. She's got a backpack on, and then there's this kind of like fuzzy, indistinct, almost like rainbow, like refractions of light. And that is the reason why I think that I've seen the movie. So the book starts with the group finding a tower that is not a tower and not supposed to be there. It's a tunnel. It burrows underground, but the narrator cannot force herself, no matter how hard she tries, to think of it as a tunnel. She is overcome with the overpowering idea that it is a tower. And she's also overcome with the sense that she's afraid of it, but even more driven by her desire to go into it and learn its secrets. Like I said, it shouldn't be here. It isn't on any of the maps created by the most recent expedition. There are structures and the remains of settlements, but no one lives here anymore. They don't know if the tower has been uncovered in the last 2 years, if it was built by the previous expedition, or if it was purposely kept off their maps. But no matter the answer, it's obviously very significant, and they know that if they learn about it, it can tell them a lot about the area and the people who have been here before them. They have a meeting that night about what to do. The anthropologist wants to focus on what they came for, which is not super well defined, just kind of like generally understanding the area better. Everyone else is interested in the tunnel, to varying degrees, and the decision is made mainly by the psychologist, but it seems like there's a consensus, kind of, to spend the next morning exploring the tower. Along with the anthropologist and the surveyor, the narrator goes down into the tower while the psychologist keeps lookout up top. Down the staircase, it opens up into a room with another set of stairs continuing down into the darkness. And they find on the wall by the other staircase a phrase of words trailing off into the darkness made out of organic matter. It's a writing that is unlike any other kind of writing. It's almost like a moss with like tiny little organisms moving around inside of it. It's like its own little ecosystem, and it is in a language that they understand. It's words with meaning. It reads as a kind of chant or a prayer or a plea or something overwhelming enough to be kind of incomprehensible. Like, she knows what the words are, but she can't fully piece together the meaning of them being in this situation and being so confounded by finding these words written on the wall in this way. The narrator is the one who steps forward to examine it. She's so drawn to it and is grateful for the excuse of being the biologist. She gets a bit closer than she knows is safe, and in that moment it lets out a little puff of spores, which she feels herself inhale, but no one else notices. And she has this kind of silent flip-flop between panic and convincing herself that nothing is wrong. She's constantly trying to consider how she feels and if there's any changes physically or mentally. This is really interesting because it had struck me as odd but obviously deliberate starting out with this book, how little attention is given to her feelings, particularly her level of physical comfort. This is ostensibly a log of data, but it is written as a story, a sequence of events, and the narrator's presence doesn't go unnoticed in that. They hiked for 4 days to get from the border to camp. They had heavy gear with them, they're sleeping in tents. There's a clear physical reality to that, one that you're well aware of while you're reading it, but the narrator doesn't waste a breath on it, even though she is writing about what she's thinking about. It's only ever thought, not feeling. This has established the character as being very scientific, valuing objectivity, being detached from her inner world and emotional state, and also heavily prioritizing the goal of her mission and channeling her focus into that. And it both pulls you in, being all thought and so inside her head, but it also distances you from her. It makes her feel just different enough, like she's from a more technologically advanced or scientifically anchored society, without actually needing to substantiate that in the text, like with some unnecessary or drawn-out descriptions of the world that she came from and how it differs from ours, things that she obviously wouldn't feel a need to write about in this journal. It's very effective. So when she starts taking inventory of her body's feelings, it almost seems like there's going to be a shift with what we've come to expect from her, but there isn't. She is still viewing this from the lens of scientific objectivity, very clinically, and she also feels a sort of indifference towards what could happen to her with this obvious contamination. I mean, if she is contaminated, which she doesn't know right away, but kind of does know, she knows it's too late to do anything. It's going to do what it's going to do to her. So she just plows on. And this is one of our first real hints as to what's going on inside our protagonist's head subjectively. She tells the others that they should go back, partly because she's worried about exposing them to the spores, but largely because she knows if she stays around, she'll feel such a strong compulsion to continue down the stairs to read the words that they would have to physically restrain her, and she doesn't know what she would do if she ended up in that situation. They repeat what they've seen to the psychologist, who insists on going to see it for herself. The narrator advises her to stay back, says that they should bring breathing masks the next time they come down. The psychologist then says a strange, kind of out-of-place phrase along with a pointed look at the narrator. She gets this prickly sensation, but it's only later that she realizes this was a failed attempt at hypnotic control. They spend the rest of the afternoon each focused on separate tasks, seeking to better understand the area that they're set up in. That night, around the fire, the women are a little rowdier, which is like almost nothing. I don't mean that they're having a party. They like laugh for the first time, and they call back to this howling noise that they've heard every night coming from around the ocean, but when it returns sounding angry, they stop immediately with like a little bit of nervous laughter. Then the psychologist lays out the plan for the following day to head back into the tunnel to gauge its depth and the age of the writing on the wall, and then return to their above-ground investigations and data collection. But then she stands up very suddenly and says consolidation of authority, and immediately the anthropologist and the surveyor go slack, and the narrator quickly pretends to do the same, as the psychologist tells them that they will remember discussing several options about returning to the tunnel or the tower and coming to their own conclusions about returning. They will feel calm about the decision and calm inside the tower, but they will not put themselves in the risk of danger. They will also continue to see a structure made of stone, and when they emerge, anytime they see a bird, it will fill them with the sense that they're doing the right thing with this expedition. They'll feel tired and go to bed, where they will sleep well and they won't dream or have nightmares. So the narrator is off-put by this, of course, but not really as off-put as you, the reader, might be. She knows that hypnosis is something that the psychologist can use to keep the expedition running smoothly. It was part of their training, and she's already experienced it with the border crossing. But at the same time, it's very strange to have it laid out in front of her so clearly, and it's so much more control than is really necessary. Like, sure, if the psychologist has been given different orders and they're meant to explore the tower, it makes sense for her to force them in that direction. But why does she have to take away their autonomy when it comes to the time they go to bed? And like their dreams? Is that even something that can be influenced by hypnosis? What seeing this tells the narrator is that whatever happened with the spore contamination has affected her ability to be hypnotized. What this doesn't do, however, is make her question her past perceptions. You hear the psychologist say that they'll remember discussing multiple options in regards to exploring the tower, and you're immediately brought back to a discussion they had the night before about whether or not to explore it, where they discussed multiple options. And it of course makes you question whether or not that conversation was real, or she's just remembering something that she was told to under hypnosis. The next morning, they wake up and the anthropologist is gone. The psychologist tells them that the two of them talked late into the night, and the anthropologist decided that she didn't want to continue on with the expedition, so was hiking back to the border to await extraction. But something stinks here, right? Because you know that the anthropologist was under hypnosis and told to go to bed early. But they move on with the idea that it's better not to have someone around who doesn't want to be there or who isn't capable of doing the job. And again, they have been encouraged not to develop personal relationships with each other, and there isn't a huge emotional aspect to this book, at least not at this point, though there are hints of it, like hints of something with her husband, with an empty life back home, so it isn't unbelievable that they can easily move on in her absence. This means that it's just the surveyor and the biologist going down while the psychologist waits up top. Immediately, the narrator notices that the tower is not a tower, that these walls are living, breathing tissue. She can feel the beat of a heart, and she knows that the surveyor only sees stone, and has been primed to be on the lookout for any signs of mental deterioration. But the biologist wants to try and coax her out of the hypnosis as subtly as she possibly can, so she grabs her hand and pushes it against the wall, telling her to feel for a pulsing, a beat. The surveyor doesn't feel it, and is shocked by being so suddenly touched and kind of forcefully told to pay attention to something that she can't feel, and she immediately becomes wary of the narrator's mental state. But the narrator manages to kind of talk herself out of being brought back up to the surface, not out of the surveyor's suspicion, though. The surveyor is definitely still suspicious. They descend farther into what she now knows is a creature, and she can see the faint outline underneath the obvious letters that indicates that this has been written over multiple times. They're taking photographs and samples, but the biologist feels defeated in her data collection. She knows that this is going to end up being fruitless, that whatever explanations she desires aren't going to be found under a microscope. After an hour of descent, the surveyor notices that the text is getting fresher as they move down, which gives them the sense that there is something below them writing. Deeper in, the surveyor notices that the floor is covered in a thick slime that gives the impression of something having slid down the stairs. And in the slime, they see another set of boot prints heading back up the stairs. The implication of a possible other human sends the narrator into thinking about the prior expeditions, most of which didn't end well, and she admits that she hasn't been honest about her connection to the 11th expedition, the one before this, where the members disappeared and then reappeared back in their homes with no memory of how they crossed the border. Her husband was on this expedition. He was there as a medic. Their marriage was already on the rocks before this choice, but he pushed them even farther into territory they couldn't return from when he decided to leave her for an unknown amount of time to a likely terrible fate. A year after he left, he showed up in their kitchen in the middle of the night, standing at the fridge, drinking milk from the carton so quickly it dribbled down his chin. The two of them spent a day together before the agency who sent the expedition came to pick him up for tests and interviews about what had happened. That first night, she brings him back to their room and she says, "I made love to him with me on top," which was so funny to me. It just felt like so out of the blue. She is saying something about him being like a shell of himself and her needing to lead and like trying to get back the husband that she once knew. But damn, just randomly the line, "I made love to him with me on top," from this like very clinical, rational, logical narrator. So funny. It isn't until the following day that it becomes so clear that she has to accept that this isn't really her husband. That he's there and he knows who she is and that this is his life, but he isn't connected to any of the emotions from his prior life. She finds him outside staring at the boat that he used to love, and she can see that he knows this boat is significant to him, but he doesn't know why, and he's like internally grappling with that. And this is when she makes her choice, presumably the choice to call the authorities at his work to take him away. Once they take him away, they discover advanced cancer, which he dies from within 6 months, alongside all of the other members of his expedition. So we know now that the narrator has an even deeper understanding than we first thought about what this expedition will likely do to her, about this as a sort of suicide trip. Back in the tower, they're quite deep in when the surveyor turns a corner and then pushes them both backwards. She says she saw what looked like a person slumped against the wall. The biologist steps forward and finds that there is a mutilated body with green ash spilling out of her mouth, no skin left on her face or her hands, but recognizable enough as the anthropologist. She's got some vials strewn around her, and it's evident in the slime on the floor that the creature leaving it was startled and turned quickly. The narrator goes back to the surveyor, and they notice a little bit above them 2 sets of boot prints facing each other. From the information in this scene, they conclude that the psychologist took the anthropologist down there under hypnosis the night before. They came upon whatever is writing on the walls, and the psychologist stopped and gave the orders under hypnosis to get a sample of it, no matter the risk to her own safety, and the anthropologist couldn't do anything but obey, and she was killed upon approach. So they head back up, and they're confused and frustrated with the expedition, knowing that a lot of the information had been deliberately obscured from them, that the psychologist, their team leader, was obviously sent here with a different set of goals, that they spent months in training that focused them on the wrong information, led them to believe they knew everything when they really knew nothing. When they make it to the top, the psychologist is gone. They had gone through all these expected scenarios, including her lying in wait, waiting to kill them, but she just isn't there. They go back to base camp, and she's not there either. The only clue is that night, when the narrator sees a light moving around the lighthouse, which has some sort of importance that I don't know of yet. Right now it's just a landmark, but a landmark that has been brought up enough, I feel like something will come of it. By the way, this whole time the surveyor and the narrator are fighting. The surveyor is very cold and suspicious and touchy with her anger, like she fully spits on the ground when she's angry with something. She's unwilling to just accept any of the things that the narrator says or the conclusions that she draws, and they're on the same level in this expedition's very unbalanced hierarchy. So when the narrator says, "I'm going to the lighthouse," the surveyor says, "Have fun with that. I'll be here when you get back, and then we'll head to the border to await extraction because this mission is over." And that's where I've read up to. The first 2 chapters, which I earlier told you was the first 3 chapters, which is about 90 pages. They are long chapters. This book is small, but as you might have noticed, it is so packed full of information and description. I think that I'm the kind of reader who really struggles with very specific descriptions. Like, I know Vandermeer is making it very clear the mental image he's trying to evoke for me. He's laying it all out. But my brain wants to fill in gaps where there aren't any because I don't often read very descriptive writing like this, like fantasy or sci-fi. I think often tends to be very descriptive. It wants you to see what the author is seeing while they're writing. So I have to actively slow myself down, and I'm often rereading descriptions again and again until it clicks into place in my brain. That isn't an issue with this book, and it's not an issue with me either. It's a very neutral experience that I'm having with it. It isn't frustrating, which I think it would be if this book was poorly written, which it obviously isn't. And it is a good thing that the descriptions are forcing me to pay attention, because basically every sentence of this book has some sort of really important information that I can't get lazy and not fully process. I can't emphasize enough, this is packed so tightly. I think it's doing a great job balancing the story and the backstory, always leaving me wanting more, doling out her motivations very slowly in a way that shows you what she believes are her priorities, and then the more personal things that are also huge driving forces for her. I think I'm going to sit down and try to read the rest of it, though this is a much slower read than most books of this size. It will take me a few hours to get through it, but I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm excited to learn what the fuck is happening, though I'm starting to think maybe there isn't a reveal. I don't know why I thought there was. But the more I think about it, the more I'm is that just something I made up? I'm also starting to believe, because nothing has come back to me from the movie, that I haven't seen the movie. I'm pretty sure I just watched the trailer. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I understand so far why this is recommended so frequently to me. I would like to feel some sort of satisfaction by the end of it, and I hope to get there, and I'll update you when I do. If I do. When I get to the end, that's what I'm saying. Okay, see you then. Goodbye. Hello there. I have finished Annihilation, and I've let it sit with me for a minute and marinate, and I'm ready to talk about it. But before I do that, I want to say I have recently moved, and I have recently moved into what is essentially just one giant construction zone. There might be construction noise in the background. I'm really hoping that there isn't. I'm trying to hold this mic really close to me. I got the low pass filter on. Fingers crossed you can't hear it, but I can certainly hear it, and I wouldn't be surprised if you could. We're just going to have to put up with the construction noise. Yesterday they were drilling. Oh my god. It was the loudest thing that's ever happened. Another thing I want to say is that yesterday while I was eating dinner, I bit my tongue so incredibly hard. I'm not sure if I can actually sit here and talk to you for very long because my tongue hurts so bad, but I'm going to try to get through it. Last time we spoke, I was around halfway through at the point that the narrator had decided to go to the lighthouse to see if she could find the psychologist. She'd split from the surveyor here. So along her trek, which takes a few hours, she feels what she calls the brightness in her chest growing stronger. This is a feeling that's meant to be incommunicable, incomprehensible to the audience, and even to her. She feels different. She feels something in her body that is alien in her body, but there's not really like a value judgment on it necessarily. While she's walking, she's thinking about the tower and what she actually knows about it. She hasn't really had a moment where she wasn't overcome with the pull of it to actually think about it and what she knows. But she is a scientist, a biologist specifically, and she wants to pull out the specific details. She knows some sort of organism is in there writing words made of living matter on the walls. She thinks about the creatures inside the ecosystem of the words and what they can tell her about the tower. And she has this idea formed that the spores had given her access to what she calls a truthful seeing. She starts thinking about the creature, which she has now named the crawler, and what it's doing in writing these words. Whether the words themselves matter or if it could be any words, whether the relationship between the words and the tower is symbiotic or parasitic. And on this last point, she's disappointed because this is something she feels she'd be able to figure out with a microscope, but the sample that she found near the anthropologist, presumably from the crawler, came back as human brain cells, some sort of mix-up with the anthropologist's body, she thinks. But then she has the thought that the superiors banned any powerful technology from entering the area with them because they were afraid of the unpredictable ways that the creature might use it. And then that starts her thinking about how both the tower and the crawler as beings possess free will, and she thinks of the words on the walls as something the crawler has memorized and brought back for the tower to analyze, as conscious and not just biological communication between the two. Then she thinks about the history of Area X, about the murky event 30 years earlier that created this border and the government's story of military research resulting in a contained environmental catastrophe that was a good enough cover that many people aren't even aware that the area exists at all, or at least they try not to think about it. They were told during training that the first expedition went in 28 years before them, 2 years after the event that created the border. They had found some way to breach the border, and they sent in this expedition who created like the first rough map. And then like all of the ones to come after, this expedition experienced psychological side effects, including paranoia, euphoria, and extreme increase in sexual desire. She thinks that they were given all of this information during their training because the higher-ups knew that it didn't matter if they knew more than the general public, because it was unlikely that any of them would be coming home. She's so lost in thought here that she doesn't realize she's made significant progress on her way to the lighthouse, which fills her with a sense of dread when she finally looks up and internalizes what the surveyor had warned her, that there's no cover here, and anyone in the lighthouse will be able to see her clearly coming from miles away. There is a little abandoned settlement between her and the lighthouse. It's dilapidated, it's full of these seemingly random eruptions of moss and lichen in the falling apart houses, which she takes some samples of, along with some samples of some animal corpses that look similar to the anthropologist's body. After heading out of the town and continuing on her way to the lighthouse, she's walking along a canal when she sees 2 dolphins swimming up it towards her. Certainly weird for them to be coming inland, but she knows it's not totally unheard of here that lots of ocean creatures have adapted to freshwater as well. What is really weird is when they pass by her, one of them looks her right in the eye, and his eye seems both uncannily human and extremely familiar in a way that she can't place. And then she finally makes it to the lighthouse, which has this crude wall that's been erected on both the inland side and the ocean-facing side. It has shards of glass in it and rusty wire, and it deeply unnerves her because it indicates a certain kind of insanity to be afraid of something attacking from the ocean and putting up a wall to defend against it. She gets to the door, which has been blasted open and is in fragments, but there's vines growing on top, which at least tells her that whatever happened here happened years ago, likely. Inside, it is the scene of a massacre. Bullet holes and stains from splattered blood and massive pools of blood and makeshift barricades are everywhere. She heads up the stairs feeling like she's heading up to someone or something awaiting her ready for ambush. The walls are covered in sprays of blood and writing, sometimes initials or little drawings, but lots of confessions from people who obviously thought that they were about to die or were in the process of dying. She comes to a landing and she recognizes it as where she first saw the light the night before. There's a photograph hanging on the wall of the lighthouse keeper from before this was Area X with his face circled. She looks at him and she wonders what his last moments were like, if he got out in time, if his body is somewhere in this building, or if he's waiting for her upstairs in some form. She takes his photo out of the frame and puts it in her pocket as some sort of good luck charm. At the top, it's clear that someone has recently been living here. It's been cleaned out and it smells like soap, but again, despite her expectations, there is no one there. She digs around the room for a bit and then thinks to move the rug underneath the table, where she finds a trap door, which she opens to a shock so intense that she drops her gun. There's the psychologist's backpack in here and her supplies and her guns, but that's not what makes her shake in fear. It's the mountain of journals, just like hers, issued by the Southern Reach. Hundreds of them, far more than could have ever come out of the 12 expeditions that have said to have been the only ones. Seeing all these journals, she's confronted with her husband's death, because the two of them were very different people. Him being very sociable, her being very solitary, very devoted to and caught up in her work, which she could never separate from the personal. Him wanting to stand out, which, seeing these hundreds of journals, she thinks his account would never stand out. And that in going on this expedition, he'd been reduced to a state similar to her own. They became the same. There is an incomprehensible, oppressive amount of data here, and there's a very visceral description of how musty and moldy it is, the smell, the damp. She just starts picking up journals at random, totally overwhelmed with it all. There's one journal that is entirely focused on a kind of thistle, and she perceives in these entries that never move away from the plant, a kind of like looming, unspoken presence in the background, as if this singular tight focus was a way to cope with the fear, to avoid naming it and bringing it all the way into existence. There's journal entries about repelling an attack from the sea by building a wall. It's all just like a long history of what has been happening this entire book. People who have been profoundly affected by this place, who are either hallucinating and going insane or are actually under the threat they believe themselves to be under. She gets so overwhelmed with all of this information that she can't do it anymore. She can't even pretend to do it, so she takes the last bit of will that she has to dig around near the top of the pile and find her husband's journal, which she takes with her but she isn't able to read yet. Back out on top of the lighthouse, she stands outside on the ledge to get some fresh air when a sudden impulse causes her to look straight down, and she can see on the beach below her a boot. A boot that is attached to a leg, that she can tell belongs to the psychologist. She goes down to the beach, and let me read you this paragraph. She sat propped up against a mound of sand, sheltered by the shadow of the wall in a kind of broken pile, one leg straight out, the other trapped beneath her. She was alone. I could see from her condition and the shape of the impact that she had jumped or been pushed from the top of the lighthouse. She probably hadn't quite cleared the wall, been hurt by it on the way down. While I, in my methodical way, had spent hours going through the journals, she had been lying here the whole time. What I couldn't understand was why she was alive. That got a gasp from me. She's alive? What do you mean she's fucking alive? Are we gonna get answers? Hello? What the fuck? The narrator touches her shoulder, and it's spongy, and then she starts shrieking the word annihilation over and over again in her confusion. The narrator says, "It's just me," and the psychologist is lucid enough to have a conversation with her. All pretenses have been dropped on the brink of death. She's now antagonistic and mocking and almost teasing in her deliberate withholding of information, but the narrator does get some information out of her. She first says that she saw the narrator heading towards her from the lighthouse and had seen that she's changed. She was aflame, according to the psychologist. She tells her that she tried to shoot her as she approached, but her arm wouldn't let her, that she thought the narrator was coming after her, that something was coming after her, and she was so afraid she jumped from the top of the lighthouse to escape it. She doesn't know what it was. It was inside her, or it was inside the narrator, or it was something she had never seen, or something that she had seen too many times. But whatever it was something that she needed to escape, and that she has died trying to escape. She says the night that she took the anthropologist down into the tower, it was because she needed more information before she risked the whole mission. But she miscalculated, and the anthropologist was killed, and her arm, her spongy shoulder, was injured. The narrator says, "Oh, that must be why you looked so shaken the next morning," and the psychologist says, "Yes, but that was also because I could see that you were already changing." The more questions that the narrator asks, the more amused the psychologist is. Even in this extremely vulnerable state, she has so much power, and she's like reveling in that power. She has so much to withhold that the narrator is desperate to know, and she becomes less and less forthcoming. giving just the little scrap that the Southern Reach are scared. They're looking for answers because the border is expanding, pushing its boundaries more and more each year. Her breathing gets more shallow, and the narrator has a moment of kindness and asks what she wants, and she tells her to leave her body there where it belongs, and tells the narrator that the one fundamental truth that she believes in now is that they never should have come. Once she's dead, the narrator searches her body, first finds that her spongy shoulder has been taken over, like colonized by a fuzzy, green, glowing growth. She also finds on her body a folded up piece of paper that lists all of her fucking hypnosis trigger phrases, which makes the narrator think she must have been so afraid of forgetting them and no longer being in control. On this list is the trigger phrase, annihilation, what she screamed when the narrator touched her shoulder, which is meant to initiate immediate suicide. It is a self-destruct button that can only be pressed by the psychologist, and she tried and failed to use it on the narrator. Throughout this part of the book here, certainly the most intense part, we're really getting down to the end, there are more memories of her life with her husband, but it doesn't ever feel like a cheap way to build suspense because it has given you this kind of personal information so infrequently, so sparingly, that you do want to learn more about her. So while it does often leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger before going back in time and diving into her relationship with her husband, the disappointment and betrayal that she felt when he decided to leave and got deep into the process before ever letting her know, her almost jealousy at his desire to do something bigger and envy that she didn't think of it first, it isn't annoying in doing that. It has a purpose. It's not just filler to pad it out before moving on to the next big plot point, and it has set you up to want it. When we come back to her after her memories, she's made the choice to head back to base camp, even though she's waited too long and she'll have to travel by dark. It isn't long into her journey that she hears that moaning that I mentioned briefly before, a noise that they had been hearing every night of the expedition, but this time it's close, and it's following her through the reeds trying to cut off her path. She runs as fast as she can, and even though she knows that whatever this creature is, it's going to beat her, and she's going to run straight into it, she somehow makes it. Exhausted, having run for her life, she makes it to a tree, and she collapses underneath it and sleeps for the rest of the night. When she wakes up in the morning, she says her brightness, this contamination from the spores, has become literal. Her skin is now faintly glowing green. She makes it almost all the way back to camp when the lightness in her flares up and gives her time to take half a step to the right before the first shot hits her in the shoulder. A second shot hits her and sends her tumbling down the hill she's on top of, but the pain of it quickly ebbs into a low ache, and she knows that this is the brightness protecting her. A second later, the surveyor calls out from where she's lying in the bushes, asking where the psychologist is and what the narrator has done with her. The narrator makes a mistake and says she's dead, but then she says, "I didn't kill her," and the surveyor repeats back one of the psychologist's hypnosis trigger phrases, a phrase that earlier the narrator had attempted to use on her, but that she had immediately noticed. And the narrator thinks, yeah, she's been sitting here stewing on that for the past day and has made me out as the enemy in her head. The narrator tries to convince her to just walk away, to take the supplies from the camp and go back to the border for extraction, but she won't relent. She says that the narrator has left and she's come back no longer human, which is another point that leads you to wonder what she might look like, knowing how the other women have been so greatly and so quickly consumed by the contamination and have both perceived her as having changed. But then at the same time, you're wondering if the surveyor is in her right mind, if whatever she's seeing is really there. The narrator ends up tricking her into revealing her position and she shoots her dead, something that she does feel remorse for. She questions the decision and what she could have done differently. After she brings the body to the water and leaves her there, she's overtaken and immobilized by the brightness, which is keeping her from feeling the effects of her wounds. When she comes to, she sees that she wasn't actually paralyzed, in the patterns in the dirt, which tell a different story, one of her twitching and spasming, of some part of her body feeling this pain. She then tells the truth of the situation, that she had originally hidden to try to present herself as truthful and objective, which is that in the moments before being shot, the brightness in her had expanded in a way that had heightened her senses enough for her to hear the sweat dripping from the surveyor's forehead, and it gave her the opportunity to avoid being shot directly in the heart. These heightened senses also allowed her to bring the surveyor down when she very briefly gave up her cover, and she says this was a spike in what she had already been experiencing but neglecting to write about. When she's finally well enough to make it back to base camp, she finds it all completely destroyed. The tents are ripped to shreds, the food is open and stomped into the ground, all of their gear is smashed, and she finds the surveyor's journal, untouched amidst this chaos, but completely blank. Every time she had been seen writing in it was a farce, and the narrator respects her, making sure that no one would ever know her true thoughts. The only thing the surveyor has left is a note that says the anthropologist tried to come back, but I took care of her. And the narrator says something that kind of summarizes the reader experience of all of the characters' journeys, which is she was either crazy or all too sane. Now alone, the tower calls to her, but she manages to resist its pull for a moment. She thinks about how Area X has changed or killed everyone who has gone in, while itself remaining unchanged, and how despite that, the Southern Reach has decided to continue doing the exact same thing, sending in expeditions full of intelligent people like it's the only option. She thinks they're feeding it. They're feeding Area X and hoping someone might manage to stumble across an explanation. She can't confirm this theory though, so she turns to her microscope to what she might be able to explain. The cells from the psychologist, both her normal cells and her crazy wounded shoulder with the glowing green fuzz all over it, are normal human cells, as are all the samples that she has taken from herself, which she thinks is impossible. The samples that she took from the dead animals in that village and the bursts of moss and lichen are modified human cells. Some sorts of transformations are taking place here. This area is taking humans and using them to create its strange transitional environment. The next thing she does is start reading her husband's journal, which she is shocked and distressed to find is addressed to her. The members of his expedition experience similar psychological effects as hers. She can see bouts of euphoria in the way that he writes. They ended up splitting their group. Her husband and the surveyor of his group go north to try to locate the northern border, but no matter how far they travel, they never come across it. Right as they decide to turn back, they see an island, which is the first island that they've seen on this coast. Their return trip back to the lighthouse takes 4 days instead of the 7 that it took them to get as far as they did, as if the land had contracted. Back at the lighthouse, there's only one survivor of what seemed to be a shootout between the rest of the expedition, which he only explains by saying, "We did not trust ourselves," over and over. And also there's some sort of encounter with something not of this world that has happened here. Her husband and the surveyor head back to the tower where they see themselves and the other now dead members of their expedition heading inside. It's so clearly not them, but it is them at the same time. It's the doppelgangers. It's presumably what came back across the border. They don't investigate that further because what the hell. They decide to split up, with the husband wanting to go and see that island. There are little interjections cutting into his narrative where he explains in great detail tidal pools and specific flora and fauna he encounters, and she realizes that these notes are meant for her, that he doesn't give a fuck about this stuff, and he had to have put in a ton of effort just to concentrate on it enough to write it down in such detail for her. She kind of gets to more of a sense of closure with her husband. She makes peace with the relationship and both of their flaws, and there's pain too. She realizes reading this journal that her husband had an inner world that he was never able to get close enough to her to share, and that she's only now experiencing it once it's too late. She puts down his journal and she heads back to where she was inevitably going to end up, the tower. Inside, she doesn't even need a flashlight because the glow from her skin is enough to light the way. She goes farther than she's ever been before, the heartbeat of the tower so deafening, it's rattling her bones, it's making her think her ears are going to start bleeding, until she gets to a corner that has a bright white light emanating from the other side of it. She turns the corner, and the book goes full throttle with the cosmic horror that has been subtly present the whole time. Or maybe not so subtly. The crawler is there, changing form at the speed of light. She says an optic nerve is not enough to comprehend it. It overpowers her, and either she's losing and regaining consciousness or the crawler is blinking into being. I think the incomprehensibility of the crawler is such a perfectly done contrast with the breadth of description used for everything else in this book. Like I said earlier, he creates such vivid images for you, and then to have her be totally unable to explain it to you at all, so unsettling. She uses all her strength, the bravest act she's ever done, to turn away from it rather than spending the rest of her life standing there staring at it. But she only makes it 1 or 2 steps before it has her, and suddenly she feels like she's drowning. She feels hundreds of fingers pressing down on her. She feels like a hot metal rod is being stabbed into her again and again. It's pure, unadulterated agony. It's gone from the impossibility of comprehending the creature in front of her to the impossibility of comprehending this level of pain. And then it tosses her down the stairs and it's over. Having scanned her, excavated her mind, it's done with her now. Somehow she manages to pull herself up and continue down the stairs. After a long time, she sees in the distance a fuzzy, bright white rectangle, a doorway of some sort. And as she moves towards it over like hours, it gets larger but no more distinct. It's also getting harder as she moves towards it to keep going. She's feeling so much pain. She's feeling like the grooves in the ceiling are being like carved into her skull, and all of a sudden she just can't anymore. She can't bring herself to take another step. It's a stop abrupt enough that she wonders if it's the effect of the hypnosis. So she does the only thing that she can do, and she heads back up towards the crawler. She's uncertain if she can survive that experience again, but she really has no choice. And then It is okay. She makes it past without being noticed, or maybe because it no longer cares now that it has the data that it needs from her. Against her better judgment, she looks over her shoulder, and she can just make out, within the ever-changing form of the crawler, the face of a man that she recognizes as the lighthouse keeper whose photo she has in her pocket. She makes it to the top and lies in the earth, solidifying her theory, being that the tower is like a thorn stuck into the planet with the intense need to assimilate and mimic, and it creates a new world by mirroring our ecosystems and becoming what it encounters. All of the expedition members were things to be remade by this thorn, natural material to be used to make something totally alien. But she also recognizes here that she doesn't have the answers. Not really, like she can't confirm anything, and she doesn't even know what questions to ask. She ends with saying that she's left this journal at the top of the lighthouse tied together with her husband's and with other supplemental material about her scientific observations, and that she plans to let herself be taken by the brightness, by the area, that she won't fight to remain human. Instead, she's going to follow her husband's footsteps up the coast to the island, and maybe she'll even find him in that weirdly familiar dolphin. And that's where the book leaves you. So I think you can understand why I might have needed to just sit with this for a while to really form my thoughts on it. I went into this with the wrong expectations, which really impacted how I felt about the book immediately after finishing it. I said something before about how I knew this book had a reveal. I don't know where I got that from exactly. Before reading this, I talked to my partner about reading this. My partner's planning on reading it next, and both of us thought that this book had some sort of twist or reveal of information that it doesn't really have. I think that maybe I've heard that from people who consider that people are being turned into creatures, the reveal, but I didn't really think that was like a reveal. The whole time I was anticipating it all to be wrapped up, and of course it wasn't, because how could it have been? And that is kind of the point, right? Like, she has these theories about what the explanations here could be, but how could she ever confirm them? There isn't a moment in this story that you feel like she's ever going to make it back to her old life. And even if she did, it's not like the Southern Reach was going to just tell her everything they knew. And then even if they did, it's like, what did they even know? But I think even larger than the lack of confirmation is this ever-present thread in the book where we're questioning her perception and her sanity and how much we can trust the evidence that supports her theories of what's going on, considering it's all been collected through her lens, one that we really have no idea the credibility of. The malleability of the human mind is on display in so many ways throughout the entirety of Annihilation, and following a biologist, I think it poses some really interesting questions about perception and the possibility of scientific objectivity. Perfect example being the tower. It isn't a tower, but she can't see it or understand it as anything other than a tower. All of her data, all data, is tainted to some degree by the person collecting it, which is made even more clear as the area begins to affect her psyche more and more, like with the cells of the psychologist's affected arm that turn out to just be regular human cells. Is that something happening in the area, or was she just hallucinating the extent of the psychologist's injury? I think that was fun every time, and gives a really strong sense of unease throughout the book. Another example being when the surveyor shoots her and says she's come back not human. Like, to what extent is that the surveyor tripping balls, and to what extent is that the physical transformation the narrator is undergoing? It's just cool. I enjoyed knowing so little about what was and wasn't real, and thinking about whether or not objective reality even really mattered. When I finished, I just wanted to know more about the area and about the Southern Reach. It didn't take me long, though, to kind of get over that and realize that I was satisfied with the book and with how much information it gave me in the end. I do think I would have had a better experience had I not gone in with the wrong expectations. It's kind of like the book Never Let Me Go, which is definitely 100%. I'm not sure with this one. Never Let Me Go, though. People say that's a book with a twist. People say, oh my god, this twist got me. I read the whole book. I got to literally the last page. I was like, damn, this twist comes really late in the book. I'm reading the last paragraph. Wow, what a way to end a book, right on the twist. There's not a twist in that book. I do not know what people are talking about. I think what they're talking about is something that is told to you right from the beginning and then repeated over and over throughout the book. That's not a twist. That's not a reveal. It ruined that book for me entirely. Though I do think that book was just not really my style. It was very emotion-focused literary fiction, where this book is more what I like. Surreal, weird, tense, dark. I liked how this wasn't really an alien story, even though if you look at it from a different angle, it very much hits the same beats as an alien story. I just think that for some reason, it was improved by the fact that it wasn't exploring a new planet, Maybe because it made the atmosphere more interesting in being familiar but also deeply unfamiliar and uncanny. And speaking of atmosphere, the setting is so strong in this book. I know I just said it wasn't an alien story, but it kind of reminded me of how strong the setting is in the miniseries Scavenger's Reign, which I love, and even more than that, I love the short film that it was based on, Scavengers, which you should go watch on YouTube right fucking now. I enjoyed the setting itself in this book, becoming an antagonist not just physically like you might expect, but psychologically. I think it's absolutely shocking how short this book is. I feel like I spent so much time immersed in this world that I have a hangover from reading a 700-page book right now. Dense is usually a negative description, but when I say that about this book, which you cannot deny, it is extremely dense, I don't mean it as a bad thing. It's just very, very full. Every sentence is meaningful and important, and so it will probably take you a lot longer to read than you'd expect with it being this fucking big, and it will demand a level of attention from you that you need to be willing to give it. There is something that I need to sandwich in between my praise here, and I'm afraid to say it, because I know how universally loved this book is, and it is praised for its fantastic writing. And I think that on the whole, the writing was really good, but I can't sit here and pretend like I didn't sometimes, every once in a while, find it to be extremely try-hard and over-the-top attempting to be really good, intelligent writing. I did think that. Let me read this to you, okay? I have 2 sentences, egregious ones, that I have tabbed to read. One of them being, but when the mind expects a certain range of possibilities, any explanation that falls outside of that expectation can surprise. Like, that's just fucking stupid. Here's another one very similar. So many lies, so little ability to face the truth. These are egregious. These are the most egregious examples. But this is a thing that happens in this book, enough that I have to mention it. There are times that the writing is trying way too hard, and it's embarrassing to read. To phrase it in these really serious, like, faux intellectual ways, and then it's the most milquetoast observation of all time, does kind of make me roll my eyes. I'm sorry. Please don't kill me. I want to reiterate, because I'm afraid, this is not the vast majority of the book. I would absolutely classify this as a book that is very well written, with beautiful and evocative prose. It just isn't always that. I'll go back to praise. I really like the characterization of the narrator. It never felt like it fell into tropiness. It never felt overly like a man writing a woman. She's complex. She's cold and calculated and scientific, but she does have an inner world, and she's not this badass, uncaring void. When backstory comes up, it's for a reason that is often both giving us more of her and something that will be referenced again plot-wise. I already said it does a very good job balancing the past and the present. This book sets out a very clear mood, and it can be easy to get lost in that mood and miss things because the writing is intelligent and complex on the sentence level. I think I probably read 30% of the paragraphs in this book more than once. That could also be because I'm reading from the perspective of someone who doesn't really read science fiction very often, but it was part of my experience. I think this book is great. I understand why people recommend this to me so frequently. A small part of me was expecting to like it a little bit more than I did. I'll admit it. I really don't have that many complaints. Like, I do think this was good. I can see the merit with this. Maybe it just didn't come to me at the right time in my life, but I was expecting a 5-star read. I was expecting to have this place in my favorites of all time, and I ended up with a really solid 4.25, which is great. Like, that is a great book. It just didn't quite click for me as much as I really wanted it to. As always, going into a book with expectations of any kind makes it worse. That's why I stop reading the synopsis as soon as I know that I'm interested in reading the book, because nothing is ever going to be what you make it out to be in your head. Anyway, that's all. Thanks for watching. See you later. Goodbye.